Welcome, everyone. So today's event is entitled The Spirit of Convivencia, and we are recording this and we will post it to our Sephardic family later. And I probably mispronounced it. Convivencia is a Spanish term meaning coexistence. It's an academic term proposed by the Spanish philologist Americo Castro regarding the period of Spanish history from the Muslim Umayyad conquest of Hispania in the early 8th century until the expulsion of Jews in 1492. It claims that in different Moorish Iberian kingdoms, the Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived in relative peace. Today, we have three scholars who have written about this topic: Sarah Aroeste, Edith Scott Saveedra, and Joyce Yarrow. Sarah is determined to help bring Ladino culture into new generations. She's an international Ladino singer, songwriter, author, and activist, draws upon her Sephardic family roots from Macedonia and Greece to present traditional and original Ladino songs with her unique blend of Balkan sounds, pop, and jazz. Since 2001, she has toured the globe and recorded 7 albums. The most recent released, Hanukkah, in 2021. In 2014, she won the Sephardic Prize at the International Jewish Music Festival in Amsterdam. And in 2015, she represented the US in the International Sephardic Music Festival in Cordova. She's currently directing the Monastir Project, an international music initiative to pay tribute to a once thriving Balkan Jewish community. In addition to composing songs, she's published numerous articles and essays about the Sephardic cultural preservation and pens Sephardic themed books for children, bringing Ladino words and music to old and young. And she's garnered a wide critical acclaim for her efforts to introduce Sephardic culture to a wider audience. Let's welcome Sarah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me present today. First, before I get started, I'm going to ask everyone to go on mute. I am going to be playing some music, so it's a little bit hard for me to hear with some background noise. So if you all go ahead and mute, that would be so appreciated. But before I get your hopes up, for those of you expecting to hear me sing live today, unfortunately, this is the first day out of 8 that I'm actually not under the covers of my bed. This is my bedroom. You were getting an intimate look into my personal space. I have been in isolation for COVID, where I have been bedridden for over the past week, and today truly is the first day that I've been able to sit upright. So it is a pleasure to be with you today and to have something else to think about. So with that, I'm delighted to be speaking to you today about a topic, Convivencia, which is very, very dear to my heart. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Now, the word convivencia, living together, is really the spirit of this beautiful city you see in front of you called Monastir. Now, Monastir is the birthplace of not only my grandfather, but of all the ancestors who came before him. Monastir is a little bit lesser known than its sort of sister city, Salonika, which is known as the Jerusalem of the Balkans. It gets a lot of credit because it had the larger population, it was on a port, and it's had a lot written about it. Whereas Monastir was equally as important, but just a little bit smaller, and fewer people knew about it because it was landlocked. I'm going to show you a map. Today, Monastir is in what is known as North Macedonia. Now, it is currently called Bitola. Bitula, if you can see my cursor, is in the bottom left corner. That is Bitula, which used to be this beautiful, thriving city of Monastir, which you can see is right by the border of Greece. So when my grandfather lived there in the early 1900s, it was known as Upper Greece, Lower Yugoslavia. Obviously, these borders weren't there at the time, and so it was very confusing as a child because my grandfather always used to say that he was from Greece, but that he was a Turk and that he spoke Spanish. So this didn't make a whole lot of sense where I was growing up in Princeton, New Jersey at the time. But as I've become a scholar in this field, it makes perfect sense why all of these different flavors and textures have come together. And for me, Monastir really is just a gorgeous, gorgeous sort of test case for all of these different influences and threads. So this is my grandfather, the sweet little boy on the right. He is all dressed up. It looks like a sombrero, but it's really not. It's a traditional outfit. The Pasha was coming to town. So the Ottoman, the Turkish Pasha at that point when my grandfather was born, it was part of the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire. And so here he is with his cousin Max, who's in his fez and his beautiful garb to welcome the Pasha. So they were very much a part of that fabric. They were neighbors with all of their Muslim and Christian and a variety of other ethnic background neighbors. Now, my grandfather left in 1913. This photo was from about 1907. My grandfather and his family and many Sephardic families of the time came during the Balkan Wars. We don't really talk about the Balkan Wars so much. 1912, 1913, my family came to America and settled in Rochester, New York. I had one relative, however, who stayed behind. So this beautiful woman in the purple, that is my cousin Rochelle Nachmias. Now this picture, I should tell you, was taken when she was 102 years old. That was 2 years ago. She is still alive at 104 years old, and she is my last living relative for whom Ladino, this beautiful Sephardic language of my family, was her first language. She was born in Monastir, and miraculously and tragically, she is only one of 2% who survived World War II in Monastir. Now, a lot of people have heard about the tragedy of Salonika, but Monastir lost 98% of its Jewish population. 98%. It's just staggering. There's nothing one can even say about it. And my cousin Rochelle survived, and her whole family did not. She's the only surviving member because she was hidden in a car and taken in a trunk over to the border of Albania, where she was given a new passport, a new identity of Fatima Hussein. And she pretended to be Muslim and lived with a Muslim family for the duration of the war, which obviously saved her. And when she came back to Monastir, everything, including her family, was gone. But she is a miracle, and she still passes down many stories to me, and she is the source of much of my inspiration. Now, I've taken the stories from my grandfather, who I was able to know well into his 90s. He loved talking about his childhood in Monastir, and my cousin Rochelle. And I've had a 2-decade career of sharing the stories through music to audiences around the globe. And one day, somebody in Monastir, again, presently Bitula in North Macedonia, saw that picture of my grandfather and his cousin Max and asked me if they could interview me. They were so excited to hear that I had a connection to Monastir. And I said, okay, sure, of course. So they interviewed me via email. And the last question they asked was, would you ever consider performing here? And of course, I said, oh, it would be a dream come true. Well, dreams do come true. This was in 2014. In 2017, I was performing in Bulgaria. If you remember the map, Bulgaria is right next to Macedonia. And I quickly asked some friends how far it was, and I realized it was not that far. Now, when this article was published in 2014, over the course of the next 2 years, I kid you not, I received dozens and dozens and dozens of Facebook friend requests from people from Macedonia. And I couldn't quite figure it out, why they would want to befriend this complete stranger. Well, these Facebook friends became lifelong friends very quickly, and they arranged this entire tour for me to come to Macedonia. They booked my travel, my accommodations. They arranged a concert for me, and I didn't quite understand why they felt so invested in me, this person they just read from this one article. This is the first moment I stepped foot, the very first time in Monastir. And again, these were all Facebook friends I made, complete strangers to me. And the very first place they took me when I landed was to the cemetery. Now, as a Jewish person, I found this somewhat amusing. Of all the places I could go visit, on my very first chance in Monastir, they, however, thought that it was the proper thing to do to show a Jew her roots, her her ancestors' gravestones, and I thought that was just so touching and so beautiful that they would think this was so important to me. Again, I just need to keep on reminding you, I did not know these people. These were truly strangers from Facebook. The very first place they took me was to the cemetery, which is the largest cemetery in the Balkans, Jewish cemetery in the Balkans. The first grave there is from 1497. 1497. So as soon as Jews were kicked out of Spain, 3 years later, they showed up in Monastir. Now, along my visit, they would take me through the Jewish streets, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that people had heard that I was coming and flung open their doors and invited me in for tea and cakes, as you can see here. Again, a complete stranger. They wanted to share stories with me of the houses and the neighbors they had before World War II. They then took me to my cousin Rochelle, that beautiful 104-year-old cousin that I have, to see her house, which is on the very main street of Monastir, and it's very famous. This is such a beautiful house. It has now been turned into a Italian restaurant, Ravenna. But the reason why it's so famous is that you can see the Stars of David in the iron grill work, and that has not ever left. So my cousin Rochelle's father built this house in 1923, and although no Jews have lived there since World War II, you can still see the grill work there, and it is known as the Jewish house. I got to sit on that balcony and soak in that history of my ancestors. And that night, I looked around again at all these Facebook friends, and I asked them, I said, why are you doing this for me? Why are you showing me so much love for my Jewish history and my Jewish past? And it hadn't completely sunk in yet that none of them were Jewish. It didn't even occur to me that none of them were Jewish. I just figured, okay, somebody had to be. But no, there are no Jews left. There are no Jews in Monastir. All of these people have made it their mission to research, support, and cheer on the preservation of Jewish life in their city. And I didn't know why until I really sat with it, and I came back to the United States and I wrote an article about it for Tablet Magazine. And I realized they don't feel guilt, because it's not something that they did. Not only did their generation not have anything to do with World War II, but even their parents' generation, there are a lot of political actions I'm not going to get in here, but suffice it to say that it's not a feeling of guilt that they show so much love. It's that they truly believe that their city and their own national identities are missing something because the Jews are no longer there. It is impossible to put into words. I have traveled the world for 20 years presenting Sephardic culture, and I can tell you, I have never witnessed the love and respect for my Sephardic background as I have in this city. And I wanted to believe it wasn't a fluke. So the very next year, 2018, I brought a group of 20 Americans with me so they could witness what I had, because I wanted other people to know that this was real, this feeling of convivencia, of all of these different religions and backgrounds coming together in the same spirit as they had earlier. And yes, they all believed it too. They witnessed it too. And this was again at that cemetery. That night, I had a much bigger performance. It was because although I had performed the previous year, this time it was sponsored by by Israel, by the city of Monastir. And that night, after the performance, a whole bunch of the audience members, we were in a very famous rooftop of the Hotel Epinal, which is a very famous hotel. And we were all dancing and singing and playing. And somebody took this photo that I saw afterwards, and I had my aha moment, which is that you can see in this one snapshot, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Israelis, Macedonians, and me singing and dancing on a rooftop together. After everything that had happened in Monastir, here we were in this one snapshot. And the two arrows are with two musicians that I contacted right after. I said, let's take this energy, let's do something with this. We have to harness this feeling of convivencia. And so started phase 1 of the Monastir project. And the Monastir project over 2 years turned into a collaboration with 30, more than 30 musicians and volunteers from 5 different countries. And I spent 2 years researching and curating 10 songs that are unique to the community of Monastir prior to World War II. So that these are songs either in Ladino, Macedonian, or in Hebrew that the community of Macedonia, the Jewish community, they sang and they loved, or that they were famous in Macedonia at the time and refer to the Jewish community. So we have 3 different languages, and you can see this gorgeous display of musicians who participated. It really was an international collaboration in that spirit of convivencia. And it wasn't just about music, it was about diplomacy. So I spent a lot of time, I didn't want to feel like the American coming in and creating this project. It's about not just the music, but about the dialogue. And I wanted to have buy-in from the countries themselves. So here I am with the redheaded woman is the mayor of Monastir, of Bitola today. And I have had many a press conference about this project. Here I am even presenting my family's story to the president of the parliament, the North Macedonian parliament, the man in the middle in the blue tie. And here I was invited to present my family's story a few years ago. So this project truly is not just about the music, it's about engaging the citizens. We want to make sure that people are educated about the story of Jews before World War II. And of course, the music. These were the 2 musicians you saw on the rooftops with me. Beautiful Macedonian singer, Saveedra Bayramov on the left and Vevki Amidov on the right playing clarinet. And I want you to hear in his own words why Saveedra participates in this project. Here we go.
Добар ден, јас сум Сефедин Бајрамов, естраден уметник од Битола. Особено ми е драго што сум дел од овој проект на познатата Сара Ароесте. Мојата комуникација, мојата желба да соработувам со луѓето од еврејската националност во Македонија во периодот после Втората светска војна. Моите родители се вселија во куќа на одселени евреи од Битола за време на Холокаустот. Јас сум се родил во еврејска куќа, тука почнуваат првите мои контакти виртуелни, за жал, да се прашувам кој во ова куќа живеел пред мене. Така што сум чувствувал некаква желба да воспоставам контакт со тие луѓе, меѓутоа во неможноста, еве преку вакви проекти го давам мојот придонес и задоволство што Тие контакти продолжуваат на едно културно поле, што се воспостави на комуникација која трае до ден денес. Кога добив покана да учествувам на овој проект, за мене беше една голема сатисфакција, една голема благодарност и на некој начин одолжување кон тие луѓе што во чија куќа се вселив и поради сплет на околности јас се родив таму. Ова соработка ќе продолжи понатаму. Се надевам дека културата, песната ги спојува народите и политиката остава на второ место.
My time is almost up, so I'm just going to go quickly through a couple of main themes of the project. This is a kindergarten class in Bitsula. Look how sweet and innocent those faces are. Well, one of the songs on the album is an anthem, their school anthem. It's called the Estrella Mara Ovadia Kindergarten. And that name is for a partisan hero of World War II who was Jewish, and she has become a hero of Macedonia. Estrella Mara was born in 1923, and she was shot down fighting against Bulgarian forces in 1944. She was part of the resistance, and this tiny little school in the middle of nowhere in North Macedonia sings as their anthem a tribute to her. The lyrics say, "For you we sing, for you we laugh, for you we dream and live happy. Estrella Mara, you are our patron for respect and glory." And it goes on. And to know that these kindergarten kids who were born literally 100 years after Estrella Mara, they are Christian, they are Muslim, they are singing their respect and love for this Jewish partisan fighter, which I just think is remarkable, and you need to hear it from their own voices. This is an intro in Ladino from my 104-year-old cousin. Finger counting game from Monastir. And these are the kids singing to Estrella Mara. Oh, sorry. Okay, so that just gives you a little ear teaser of the just such sweet kids. And of course, I participate on the album. I'm not just the director and the curator, but I did compose a few songs. And just to quickly end, to show you some of my inspiration, the red arrow on the top is my cousin Rochelle when she was in her early 20s. Here she is walking on the cobblestone streets of Monastir with her friends and family. As we know, she's the only one in that picture who survives. And there I am just 3 years ago on that same exact street. And so to literally walk in the same footsteps as your ancestors and to put that all in song, one of my most personal songs on the album, it's called Mi Monastir, and it was taking the memories that my grandfather and my cousin Rochelle passed on to me and putting it all in a song. And one of the stories, for example, is about this beautiful mezuzah that you see in this snapshot. Her Christian neighbor, the night of March 11th, 1943, when Nazi forces invaded, their neighbor knew that all of the Jews would be taken away and knew how important a mezuzah was to a Jewish family and removed the mezuzah from my cousin Rochelle's door in the hopes that one day she'd be able to return it to the family. And sure enough, years later, Rochelle and the neighbor reunited, and Rochelle was given back the mezuzah. And I've held this mezuzah. Rochelle still has it. And so I did write a song about all of these memories. The top picture, you see, this is Rochelle when she was 5 years old, and this is her family who was tragically murdered. and these are all pictures of family members. This red arrow is my grandfather. But I take all of these memories and I put it into this music, and I'm just going to play the very first few seconds.
tus criaturas Dios moran, respiramos tus colores, aspirando tornar, guardamos tus poses, aspirando tornar. Monastir trae mia casa, onde las calles me aman, las estrellas me hablan, las memorias me cantan.
Okay, so this brings me to the end. We are now in phase 2 of the Monasteer project, and that involves documenting the stories behind the music. Every single song in this project has a story, and it's not just about this one album. Yes, we did create a physical album, but it goes so far beyond that. It's the music, it's the education. We want to get into schools. We want to bring it to all over Macedonia, and so we are filming. You saw that little snippet from Saveedra and Bayramov, but we need to get professional documentation of the participants, and we are performing live this summer. We've been invited to participate in 3 summer festivals in Macedonia, where we can really get this work done and tell these stories to the Macedonian people today. So I'm just thrilled about that. And I was told I can't advertise, but I will say that I'm also leading a trip to Macedonia, which will coincide with that those last dates in Skopje. So if you want to hear me live, if you want to see the premiere of the Monasteer project live in Macedonia, you can come with me, and all of that information and how you can participate in the Monasteer project. There are many ways that we need help and participation. You can learn it all on my website, and you can also listen to the whole album right off my website. So thank you. And in the spirit of Convivencia, I am going to pass it on, I believe, back to Mark.
Thank you, Sarah. That was wonderful and very moving. And I wanted to remind everyone to please stay until the end. We're going to have a Q&A session. Our next speaker is Edith Scott Saveedra. She was born in California, American father and mother from Republic of Panama. She earned her bachelor's degree, magna cum laude, from Harvard, where she studied Spanish, political philosophy, history, and social theory, and her Juris Doctor, cum laude, from Harvard as well. She has a distinguished career as an international lawyer, business consultant, and author based in Hong Kong and Singapore, and is co-author of several leading nonfiction works on the competitiveness of industries, regions, and nations. For the past 10 years, she has been bringing alive the Spanish Sephardic heritage of Judeo-Conversos through her bilingual novel, The Lamps Albarracin, Los Candiles de Albarracin, and educational videos. Her current efforts are focused on educating the public in Spain, particularly students, about the Sephardic heritage and history, including true stories of resistance to the Inquisition, contributions and Sephardim to Spain, and the importance of interfaith friendship. Her educational short film, The Lamps of Albarracin, Resistance to the Inquisition, is being taught in Spain and the US, and the most recent is the subject of series TEDx Spain Talks and Events.
So I'm going to screen share. I'm going to share here. Very good. Can everyone see? We got it up?
Yes.
And you can hear. Very good. Oh, wow. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. And Sarah, I'm so moved by that incredible, true account and presentation of beautiful music. I'm going to take you today about 15 years back beyond when Sarah's ancestors arrived in Monastir. And we're going to head west back to Iberia, to a region called Aragon. And many of the Sephardim who left Aragon in 1492, in fact, boarded ships that took them east. They knew they were going to Naples, but afterwards, many of them had to go further because the Inquisition was growing and extending its reach. So I firmly believe that some of the people of Monastir were from Aragon, and we're going to hear more about that now. So my novel is a, see, I've had to press down, yes, bilingual, prepared in English and Spanish at the same time. And we're going back to the 1480s, and we're going back to Aragon, which is here in the northeast corner of Spain, which was a powerful kingdom at that time, whose power actually extended all the way to Naples. Now, my novel celebrates the glorious culture of Sepharad in Spain in that last decade, leading up to the expulsion of the Jews in 1492. We're talking about the early Renaissance, when they left Spain. And our culture was glorious, not just in the famous cities, but also in the towns and villages across Spain, including Aragon. And here is my heroine, Sarah, also Sarah, and she narrates the story. Now, this portrait I call my Sephardic Mona Lisa, and she is very important to me because to me, she represents the many portraits of beautiful Spanish Sephardic women that would have been painted in Spain if the Inquisition had not gotten in the way. And here is the town of Albarracin in Aragon, where Sarah in my novel grows up with her brother and sisters and her friends who are Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. There are many lamps in my novel, as you surmise from the title, lamps from different traditions and religions. So all of these are lamps which appear in my novel. So why lamps in the Sephardic tradition? Well, according to Proverbs 20:27, the soul of man is the lamp of God. And as Rashi points out in the Sepharia commentary here, also while the soul of man is sacred, it also sheds light on our innermost being. So in my novel, a character will have a lamp, and the lamp will hold a sacred message and also gives us insight into the inner being of the character. I love these lamps. This is Sarah's lamp in the novel. These are in the Spanish Sephardic tradition. They are the creation of the ceramist Inbal Oren of Tel Aviv, whose ancestors left Spain in 1492, and has a long-standing fascination and loyalty, love for the Sephardic oil lamp. And this is a new limited edition by Inbal, and we see that she has the sacred motifs of the sacred olive and the menorah, this time in gold. This is also by Inbal Oren, and this is a lamp in my novel, The Little Sister Reina. Reina is a child prodigy. My story explores what would have happened if a child with the prodigious spiritual and intellectual gifts, on par with the great Rabbi Isaac Luria, what if that child had been born a girl in a household in a remote part of Spain? You know, these two, the Catholic monarchs, they started their own inquisition to discover and root out so-called heretics to the Catholic faith. And if a heretic did not accept Jesus Christ as their personal Messiah and Savior, according to their preaching, their souls would be damned forever. And this is a contemporaneous painting from Spain, which sort of gets that message across. So the year 1484, King Ferdinand sends the Spanish Inquisition into his kingdom of Aragon for the very first time. And this really shocked the people in the region that I'm writing about, Albarracin and Teruel, because if we see them, they're in this detail box, Albarracin here and Teruel. They're far from the center of power in Aragon. And for that reason, for a couple of centuries prior, they'd had rights of self-governance called fueros. And in fact, the Catholic monarchs themselves had made a visit to this region a few years prior and reaffirmed those rights. So the arrival of those inquisitors to the gates of their cities was a real shock. Now, another aspect of this region is the very high degree of convivencia, or living together, of the three faiths. In fact, to my research, it was one of the highest degrees ever achieved in Iberia, or achieved at that time in Iberia, in fact, in Europe overall. And let's look at the city of Teruel. My friend Rachel Spector took this photograph. She actually got on a ladder, asked for a ladder, and climbed up a ladder in a cathedral in Teruel to get this, because you see the amulet on the infant Jesus, which has meaning to the three Abrahamic faiths. So in Teruel, wealthy Christian, Jewish, and Muslim families lived along a prominent avenue in mansions next to each other and across the street from each other. And they sold these properties directly to and from each other, as is now proven by the conveyance documents that survive. And Teruel and its surrounding towns were an important center of Spanish Sephardic culture and learning, including beautiful synagogues, a Talmudic school, and a Hebrew printing press that after the expulsion of 1492 would influence far-flung corners of the diaspora, all coming out of this little-known corner of Spain. So when the inquisitor arrives, uninvited, at the gate to the city of Teruel, and this is the gate to the city of Teruel, the city council won't let him in. And the town prepares to defend all its residents of all faiths behind its city walls as one city. The town council actually sends a letter to King Ferdinand informing His Majesty that His Majesty was wrong to send the Inquisition to their city, because the judgment of souls is reserved for God at the end of time. You can imagine King Ferdinand's response. And these actual historical events, which are today almost forgotten in Spain, and I'm working to make sure that they are remembered and taught, they form the backdrop to my novel. And Sarah, our heroine, needs to flee from Spain. She has until now been locked up in a convent due to a twist of the plot, and she escapes that convent. How does she escape? Sarah is given protection by a Muslim family who are friends from her childhood. She dresses in disguise as a Muslim, and she joins them on their travel across the mountains to the coast. Her chaperone is Aziza, a Muslim woman of great courage and heart. Here is a drawing from the early 1500s by a German who came to Spain, to Aragon, of how the Muslim families were actually traveling at that time. Notice the baby in the basket attached to the saddlebag. So Sarah is also traveling with Fatima, a Muslim teenager, and they become very close friends over the course of their traveling together. So this interfaith band of strong women, they cross the rugged mountain peaks of the Sierra del Barracin, which you see here, and one night they have to pitch camp in the wilderness, and it's a miserable place with thorns, brambles, and thistles. The cries of wild creatures rise from the stream, and the muleteers light a fire and they roast the haunch of a goat. Now, Fatima has brought her kitten along in the basket attached to the saddlebag, which is in fact how they actually carried pets in those days. And Fatima is terrified that her kitten is going to get eaten by a wild cat, which are, they're in those mountains, or a weasel, and the mother weasel hisses at them from the distance, and Sarah lights Aziza's travel lamp. That night, she can't sleep. Nestled in my prayer rug and camel hair, I felt cold in my bones. I woke in the dark, seized with the fear it was an ill-fated hour. The shrieks of the owls were unearthly. Finally, I entered the world of dreams. The bittern nested in the reeds. Weasels hissed at cats, and one satyr called to another. I settled to toss restlessly on the forest floor, half nightjar, half woman, luring men to their deaths in the desolate Edom of Isaiah. In Spanish, the nightjar is the chotacabras, a frightening legendary creature. These words map to the English translation of Isaiah 34:11 from the Orthodox Jewish Bible. And thorns shall come up in her citadels, nettles and brambles in her strongholds. The weasels or martens shall encounter wildcats, and the sair, wild goat, calls to its companion, and the lillet dwells there, and there shall the bittern nest and lay her eggs. So after more adventures and pursued by the Holy Brotherhood, Sarah and her companions arrive in Valencia at the beautiful inland sea of La Albufera. And yeah, Sarah finds herself in the midst of the most fragrant and beautiful bushes of myrtle. And in the final illustration of the novel, we see sprigs of myrtle. You see them here with berries, myrtle that has borne fruit. And what is the hidden message in the illustration? If we look at Sepharia, Isaiah 55, actually, 55:13, instead of a briar, a cypress shall rise. Instead of the nettle, a myrtle shall rise, and these shall stand as testimony to the Lord, an everlasting sign that shall not perish. And I think of this when I think of Sarah's ancestors and so many more departing Spain in 1492. So I'll read a little bit from Sarah herself before I close. I was 14 when King Ferdinand sent the royal monarch's inquisition into Aragon. For the next 5 years, I lived in sequence as a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew. Was I a different person each time? No, I was always Sarah, no matter who I appeared to others. Though my life was at risk, I learned not to judge my companions by their faith, because the worst and the best in all of us is the same. Most importantly, the best. From the Kingdom of Aragon in the 15th century, a Jewish girl sends us a message of interfaith friendship, a message of light, a message very important in our world today. So there we go. We have to contact the author. I'm reachable, and books available around the world online from Amazon.com, etc. Devi Rachowski was the artist who, from Madrid, drew those beautiful myrtles and apothecary lamps, and here's in Balaran as well. And this will be, I'm sure, posted with the rest of our presentation. I have credits for all of the photographers as well at the back of this. So here we go. And I need to figure out how to unshare. So let's see. I have a pause share. I have a new share. Let's see if I can unshare here. Yes, a stop share. Good, we're back. And now it's my pleasure to be able to introduce Joyce Yarrow. And Joyce also, and her exciting new book, Sahara and the Lost Books of Life. And I love this book, and I have really, really enjoyed reading it. Joyce has authored 5 novels and began her writing life at the age of 17 in New York City, riding the bus to the Lower East Side. I love that image of Joyce. She was inspired to write Zahara and the Lost Books of Light after reading a newspaper article about Doreen Al-Hadef's pioneering effort to obtain Spanish citizenship under the newly passed Spanish right of return law. And I'm sure that Joyce will tell us more about that. I loved reading Zahara and the Lost Books of Light. The 2 books share so much with each other. These are both books about women, strong female heroines who risk their lives for their values and beliefs, the ideals of the Convivencia, and both celebrate the extraordinary cultural achievements, both of the Spanish Sepharad and of the multicultural society that was Spain prior to the expulsions. So in our 2 novels, as I'd like to say, time is fluid and the truth is timeless. Yes, Joyce, beautifully done in Joyce's work. Joyce does more than bring alive medieval Spain. She tells a story that's also set in Spain today and a fast-paced suspense novel. From the Library Journal, quote, Joyce Yarrow is the author of literary novels of suspense that appeal to readers who enjoy unusual mysteries with an international setting. Joyce, I hand it to you.
Oh, thank you, Edith, so much. First, I want to thank Mark for putting us all together here and hosting and facilitating. It's really been wonderful meeting Edith and Sarah and interacting. And it's just a very meaningful start, I think, of many events to come. And I think that Edith's work, her novel, The Lamps of Albarracin, is a fantastic story. And it's also filled with the music and poetry of those days, in which the characters, they sing to each other, they talk in poetry, and there's a whole sense of how they interacted in those days, which I found extremely moving and valuable, when I read it. So I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen. Here we go. And a few weeks, this is my book, Zahara and the Lost Books of Light. A few weeks after September 11th, Samya Pani and I, and here's Samya, second from the right, formed a vocal ensemble called Abrace. And we felt that our mission was to try in our own way to counteract the drums of war by creating some harmony through music. And we did this for about 13 years, and we created our own musical convivencia wherever we went. And we sang in 21 languages. And little did I know, one of those languages was Ladino. And little did I know that someday these songs, especially Cuando Reina en Brod, would inspire me to write a book. My first clue about what this book would be about came when my husband met me at the airport. This reminds me to talk about that. When he met me at the airport and gave me this newspaper article about Doreen Al-Hadef and how she was the first Sephardic Jew to apply for citizenship under the new law in Spain. And Doreen and I, I'm happy to say, have since become good friends. I learned a lot from her as I was working on the book. And, her pioneering story really intrigued me as a writer and also as a Jew from a very different background who's been fascinated by the vibrant culture of the Sephardim who live in my neighborhood here in Seattle. And as it turned out, many of my neighbors have come and helped me with my work and my research on this story. So I traveled to Spain in Doreen's footsteps. And on my first night in a small town in Andalusia, I climbed a hillside and I photographed this plaque. It's inscribed with a legend of 2 star-crossed lovers. And what they say is that their spirits blend together and come down into this fountain that's below the plaque. There are many tragic stories like this one in Spain. And it's a metaphor for the many complex relationships that have shaped that country. But there was also a time in medieval Spain when the three seemingly diametrically opposite cultures, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, worked together and blended their creative efforts. I think that this type of creativity and sharing of cultures is really a lot of what Convivencia is about. As Sarah really beautifully illustrated also, that when this collaboration comes forth, it brings out the best in all of these cultures. And this Hebrew Bible, known as the Kennicott Bible, is a great example of this. It was designed and handwritten by a famous scribe, Moses ibn Zabara, and lavishly illuminated in an abstract style, influenced by Muslim artistic tradition. Unfortunately, as we know, the Convivencia was very brief. And in 1498, in the Plaza Bibarambla, thousands of precious manuscripts, handwritten in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Arabic, were burned by order of the Inquisition. But today, tourists visit the square, and there's really no indication of what happened here, which I found really interesting. But it was also here that the premise for Zahara and the Lost Books of Light emerged. I asked myself, because, writers, I think when you start working on a book, the first thing are the what-if questions that are going to drive your story. And I asked myself, what if some of these invaluable cultural and religious treasures were rescued from the flames of the Inquisition by two powerful mystics? What if Ibn al-Arabi, the Sufi mystic, and the rabbi Abraham Abulafia had worked together to find a pair of human hands to save this precious knowledge and transport it into a salt mine in La Alpujarra? Because I discovered that many libraries store their books in salt mines when they're doing renovations. And so that's where I got that idea. And so the fictional underground library, I named it Zahara, which means light in both Hebrew and Arabic. And it's designed by Hasdai the seer in the shape of the tree of life, and becomes a hidden refuge that survives into modern times. And here's a picture of La Alpujarra. Well, of course, there's nothing like a strong female protagonist, as we know. Alia Crespo is a journalist from Seattle's thriving Sephardic community. And I have to say that she's loosely based on Doreen, and Doreen knows this. She's a woman capable of pulling all the pieces of the mystery together when she's called upon by her new Spanish friends to help save the Library of Light. Alienor is gifted with second sight in the form of visitas, for visits with her female ancestors. And one of these ancestors is Jaria Sadiki, a Mariska bandit. So she's from a very different culture. And this is when Alienor discovers that her family tree that she's been researching is a lot more complicated than she thought. And so when Zahara is invaded by their enemies, Alienor must find a way to enter the tunnels undetected. And in the scene that I'm about to read, you're going to find out just how courageous Alienor is. So here I'm going to stop sharing so that you can see me reading. So in this scene, the Guardia has invaded Zahara. Captain Suarez spoke briefly on his cell and scanned the room, doubtless in search of me. There was no guard posted out back, and I crept outside, praying my exit would go unnoticed. With no idea which way to turn, I instinctively chose a narrow track that round through the woods and would quickly take me out of sight. I jogged for half an hour before stopping to catch my breath and retrieve Celia's gift from my pocket. It was Inspector Ferdinand's card, on the back of which she had scrawled, "Find out what he knows." I was desperate to know what was happening underground. For all I knew, the books had been loaded into a truck and were headed God knows where. I had to get down there to check, but how could I, with all the entrances blocked by disciplined, uniformed men? I was unprepared for the simple answer that came my way. Jaria is waiting. Backlit by the sky where the meadow abruptly ends, bluebells and snow stars inhabit the cliff's edge. along with modern descendants of the gorse bush I vividly remember. My bold Mariska ancestor from the Siddiqui side of the family watches intently as I pull aside the branches covering the metal stake and the cable wound around its base. I reach down and grasp one end of the braided wire. Can I trust this? Her voice sounds softly within my skull. Why not? This is a different kind of Vijita. I am me, Alienor, acting on my own behalf, in my own body, in my own time. It is Sharia who appears to be out of her element, slightly transparent, yet embodied enough to watch over me from another dimension. I look down and feel adrenaline coursing through me as fiercely as the river rapids below. I know what I have to do, and I'm terrified. Yet perhaps, because I've experienced this descent before, having merged with Sharia when she performed the stunt centuries ago, I'm able to take control. Alternating my hands along the rope, I focus on becoming one with the downward pull of gravity, and linger only as long as needed at each foothold before moving on. When I reach the ledge bounding the cave, I bounce lightly off the rock face to generate momentum before swinging into land gently on the solid ground. What relief I feel is tempered by my fear of what's to come. There were no torches or air shafts to light the way, and without my cell phone flashlight, I would have been doomed to immobility. I took a step forward, then another, before paralysis set in at the thought that only one tunnel branch led to my destination, and I wasn't sure which one. Methodically, I felt my way around the edges of the main cavern, where I'd once witnessed the dramatic arrival of Sharia, Hasdai, and Idris, with their saddlebags of books and silk-dyeing supplies. A jagged outcrop from a boulder bruised the palm of my hand, as if reaching out to tell me something. It was the same ledge shared by Sharia and Fatima when they talked about defending their homeland, and behind it, I found the entryway I sought. And so Alienor is able to get back into the Sahara, and I guess those that want to know what happens might think about reading the book. So Edith and I have had some really interesting talks, and we'd like to sort of continue on in that vein today. We have a few questions that we might start out asking each other and sort of see where it goes from there. And I think I'm the one that's going to, the ball comes to me, so I'm going to pass it to her by asking you, Edith, when you use the term convivencia, what does that mean to you? Unmute yourself, please. We want to hear you. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah,
Oh, there you are.
I'm all set. Okay,
We
so
got
yeah,
you.
both our novels share that premise. And I think for me, although the Convivencia has a historical context, I use this term as aspirational, an ideal for our society to work towards, something to work towards in our present day. And I'm motivated in this by my own underlying political values, the values of political pluralism. We respect diversity in society. We respect the rights and differences of ourselves and others, and the protection of everyone's rights and liberties. Equal participants in civil society. And this is, again, aspirational, an aspiration that I hope that all of our societies can work towards. And for this to come true, one thing I've learned is that we basically have to live together. We have to interact together because, it's really proximity, relations, and friendships that are the building blocks of this vision for society. And also, I guess as my rabbi pointed out this morning, understanding each other helps prevent chaos and violence as well. So pass it back to you, Joyce. What does it mean to you?
Well, I think for me, a lot of our lifelong impressions start in childhood. And I think sometimes we learn about something by first experiencing its direct opposites. And so in my case, growing up in the Southeast Bronx, there was a lot of gang warfare. There was a lot of discord between many different groups, and the gangs were, defined by ethnicity, and there was all this strife. I took refuge in the library, and that's where I found, that it's possible for people to experience and share empathy. And from there, I moved into music and other areas where this type of cooperation between cultures is just sort of a natural thing that happens spontaneously, as Sarah can tell us, in really amazing forms. And I learned that although music follows, these laws, of harmony and everything, that it also has a lot of room for individuality. So that convivencia does not mean erasing your individuality. If anything, it strengthens it because you're sharing it, and you need to know who you are and share that with people as part of the whole process. So I think it's a very tactile experience of convivencia for me. And I'm going to ask you something now, Edith.
Okay.
What experiences in your own life have widened your worldview and brought alive this spirit of convivencia on a personal level?
Yeah, I wrote my novel in the Republic of Singapore. And at the time I wrote my novel, I had been living full-time in Asia for 20 years, 10 years in Hong Kong first, and then 10 years in Singapore. In Hong Kong, I was really impressed by the openness of the people there to newcomers like me. And in Singapore, well, Singapore is a profoundly multicultural society, and people of different backgrounds, faiths, religions live together and interact together in a compact city, on a daily basis. It's fluid. It's just every day. Singapore's public holidays, include, for example, in no particular order, secular holidays, Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, and Hindu holidays. So we have Hari Raya, it's two versions. We have Vesak Day, we have Diwali. And in fact, people my age who grew up in the old villages, the kampong, they will still be conversant in a number of languages and dialects reflecting the different peoples they grew up with. And also, I was privileged to be able to attend an amazing Sephardic synagogue that is in Singapore. It is called Chesed El. And there I learned so much about the traditions and contributions of, for example, the Mizrahi traditions of Iraq. And so I do encourage you all to look up the website of Chesed El. It's a treasure. So many cultures converge in Singapore, and it was the daily interactions that inspired me. It sort of opened my eyes, looking back to multicultural Aragon and the level of living together in convivencia that was achieved in Teduel, for example. It allowed me to bring it alive. Yeah. So I think it's time for me to ask you a question. Yeah. So
Okay.
both our novels feature strong women, and these women find courage in risking their lives for their values. Now, in your novel, I'm intrigued by all of your strong women, and there are several of them at different points in history. In particular, I'm intrigued by your character, Jariya, whom I believe was a female Muslim guerrilla fighter from the Spanish past. It really surprised me that a Muslim woman hundreds of years ago would have been a guerrilla fighter. So please tell me more about Jariya.
Well, during the War of La Alpujarra, when they were, the army was in the process of expelling all the Muslims, because they had already expelled all the Jews in 1492, and this is in the early 17th century, in the 1600s, that they decided to expel all of the Muslims. And so they fought back, and their homeland in La Alpujarra is very hilly and remote, and especially at that time. I imagine there were no roads, there were just paths. And the Jariya helped to bring the books that were not burned by the Inquisition, in my sort of alternate history scenario. She helped to bring those books up to Zahara. And she had a history of having fought by her father's side, as a partisan. Much like Estrella Mara that Sarah was talking about. People, there are many Jewish partisans who only recently are being celebrated now, women, who fought and gave their lives. And in places like Monastir, there's a book that I just got about these partisans in Monastir that includes many women. And so I think it's really important that we tell their stories. And in Jaria's case, she turns out in the book to be one of Alianor's ancestors. And Alianor gets a lot of her strength, from experiencing life through Jaria's eyes. And many of her other female ancestors, too. It became quite a journey. I mean, as a writer, I've never gotten into magic realism a whole lot, but all of a sudden it happened to me. It just seemed it was the right time, and I just found myself writing through the eyes of these really strong women in the 16th century. So thanks for that question, Edith. So speaking of questions, do we want to move on to a bit of a Q&A and a Q&A? A Q&A?
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
I want to thank all of our speakers today. This has been really a wonderful event to share this spirit and this concept of that I had never heard of until it was brought up. And so this is part of my learning and what I want to share. And people have been putting information into the chat, and we're going to open it up now for Q&A. So if you would like to ask a question, please take yourself off of mute and ask your questions.
So for Sarah, I was wondering what language you spoke to the people in Macedonia.
Oh, well, unfortunately, my Macedonian is not up to par. That's Cyrillic. Woo, it's hard. I'd say primarily broken English and some Spanish. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
They really, it's incredible. They work really hard to learn Hebrew. So, they're dedicated, and especially because that cemetery, which they have spent so much time. I mean, as I said, there are no Jews left there, so the only people to take care of the Jewish cemetery are the non-Jews, and the gravestones are almost all in Hebrew. So they've worked really hard. Also with Israelis, there's a wonderful cooperation with the Israeli government to help restore the cemetery.
Thank you.
Yes.
In your introduction of Sarah, hi Sarah,
Hi.
you forgot to mention that she was just awarded the Sephardic Young Leadership Award by the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America last month. So congratulations.
Thanks, Jake.
Yeah.
Very nice. So, and I also wanted to add on with respect to the cemetery and the significance of all of those gravestones. They're in Hebrew, and what we've done in Our Sephardic Family, for example, in research and genealogy. People have posted in our group, what does this mean? And because of our very large audience, very scholarly understanding of these different things, we got a lot of responses, and it really helped doing that research.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. It's all been digitized, and the Israeli government, we got a lot of support with the cemetery, and we had something called the hackathon a couple of years ago that the Israeli government enlisted Macedonian and Israelis to come together to help digitize the whole cemetery. So a lot has been happening, and a lot of cooperation across borders. It's really beautiful. Again, Convivencia.
Perhaps you can use Aaron Hassan's example and have some sort of a museum there, and the artifacts or information about this community.
Mark, you don't know the half of it.
Well, perhaps that is another subject, another topic for one of our future events.
Yeah, we're working very hard on all of that. There's
That's great.
really incredible Holocaust museum, but it's in the capital, Skopje, and where there are some Jews. There are about 200 Jewish families in Skopje, but Monastir is really where the pre-World War II community was the richest. And my dream is to have my cousin's house, no disrespect to the Italian restaurant, but one day we hope to turn that into a living museum.
That's great. Any other questions, anyone?
Yeah, Mark, could I come in?
Yes, please.
Yeah, hi. Greetings from London. Anyway, thank you very much, Edith, Joyce, and Sarah. That was a really inspiring set of presentations and very different angles too, I think, on the whole sort of aspect of Convivencia. And I think it's really important, you know, in a way to recognize that Convivencia isn't just a historic episode that happened in countries in the past. It's actually, as you demonstrated, Sarah, something that's actually living and vital now. And I think also very important to Edith and Joyce, you know, through your stories, that we tell stories about this, about Convivencia and how it's worked and how it's been lived and what it's meant to people in the past and in the present. I mean, I know from Joyce's book, you know, that you link the past and the present actually to show how it has relevance. What I wanted to ask Edith was, it's a very specific story. I've got your book, thank you very much, which Joyce kindly sent to me. And I'm sort of halfway through reading it and enjoying it very much. But what I wanted to know a little bit about, you were very specific about that place, that village of Al-Baraseen, and about Sarah and all this. Where did this idea come from? I mean, what brought you to that particular town or village? I mean, what drew you there to write this story? Because it seems very almost, I wouldn't say this, but almost autobiographical. I mean, you're writing with such passion about Sarah. And I just sort of wondered how you developed the character and how you came to that place.
Yes, I gave a short personal discussion of this on the Jewish Heritage Alliance event. It's recorded on their websites, October 31st. And I went back to my own childhood and my upbringing in Washington, D.C. in the 1970s. My mother came from a very remote place in the interior of Panama. It wasn't remote in the 1600s. In fact, Panama City at one point was the largest city in the Americas because it sat on the gold route between the Atlantic and the Pacific. But my mother's family had been isolated since about 1670 in a very remote place. And she taught me and raised me according to precepts, rules, with passion. Precepts and rules that didn't make any sense to me growing up in the nation's capital. Until much later, when I read my departed friend of blessed memory, David Gitlitz's incredible book, Secrecy and Deceit. And when I read the actual quotations in the endnotes of the chapters, I began to cry, because everything that my mother had raised me by, very specific things, were there in Inquisition testimony in 15th century Spanish or Aragonese, verbatim. And that really did move me very, very much to bring those voices alive. And the upbringing came in the story. Yes, it is autobiographical to the extent that the things that her father teaches her are what my mother taught me through extraordinary continuation of tradition, and directly correlate to the statements before the inquisitors made in the 1400s. That's one part. Why Aragon? Now, it is true that on my mother's side, we actually trace back to a little town within the limits of Albarracin. But I gave up early on in attaching importance to my particular family background. I decided that what really mattered was the history of resistance in Aragon, because when I began to get into the history, it's extraordinary. The resistance to the arrival of the Inquisition into Saragossa in 1484 was the inflection point in the enforcement of the Inquisition in Spain going forward. Because the Inquisitor sent into Saragossa to the Cathedral of La Sale was assassinated. He was murdered in the back, stabbed in the back while at prayer. And the leading converso of Aragon, the highest judicial authority in the land, the magistrate Jaime de Montesa, was implicated in that. And I decided when I went beyond that to see that we had this extraordinarily high degree of convivencia in Teduel, which most of the people of Teduel don't know about. And an incredible female heroine, Brianda Besante de Santangel, who gave her life up to teach women and girls Judaism in her home. I decided, wow, this is it. This means so much more than any family story, but I can also enrich it.
And
Very
you
interesting.
did.
Yes.
You did
Yeah,
enrich
thank you
it.
very much. And I thought you gave a very nice touch with saying that many of the families who left from Aragon may have gone to Bitola or to Monastir, which is a nice link with what Sarah was talking about earlier.
It makes sense. Projected,
Yeah.
it makes sense, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful event. Thank you for putting it together.
Anyone else have any questions?
I have a follow-up question. First of all, thanks again to all three presenters. This has been a very inspiring session. And thanks to Joyce here in the Seattle area that brought this to my attention. Thank you, Joyce. Edith,
It's great to see you.
good to see you too. Edith, you definitely caught my attention when you mentioned the interior of Panama, because I have some connections there too. Where in Panama is your mother's family from, and have you been able to find anything about preservation of practice or tradition in that part of the world?
Yes. My mother's family is from the peninsula of Azuero. To the rest of you, that's a boot that sticks out into the Pacific Ocean. And when she was a little girl in the 1920s, it was 3 days by ship to Panama City, and there was no road. Well, the first road actually connected in 1920. The first fragrant odor of gasoline, which would break open all the traditions and really put an end to this continuous teaching of tradition across centuries. So how did that happen? It's because Panama City in the early 1600s and the late 1500s, I guess at least the late 1500s, was the largest city in the Americas. It sat on top of the gold routes. And my family, by tradition, we know we were traders. We traded in pearls and precious gems and other things. We endowed the convent in what was at that time the largest cathedral. And why did we do that? Because we were Spinoz in Barcelona. And we had the Inquisition obviously at our heels. We don't have documentation of that, but apparently my family kept the records of what the convent owed them under their beds for 300 years in the provinces. So this was documented. So what you see here is part of a much larger story, which has been narrated really well by Dr. Isaac Amon of the Jewish Heritage Alliance, just one little strand of how traders and merchants from Iberia, either converted or not converted, had to leave and came out of just all the way across the sea. And very curiously, in my mother's family, the women kept all these traditions alive for over 300 years. It's oral. The records in Panama were all destroyed by the fire when Morgan burnt Panama City. So it's oral.
Well, thank you. It's very inspiring. I just have to share, on my wall behind me is a Diablico from Chitre on the Azuero Peninsula. So.
Yeah, we're just down the road from Chitre.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Well, it's great to see you here, Tony, and I wanted especially to introduce you to Sarah and Edith, because Tony runs the Early Music Society here in Seattle and has done wonderful presentations about the Convivencia going all the way back, that are all presented through songs and music, and I hope you continue to be in touch. And also, Stefan, thank you for coming, for dialing in from London. It's wonderful to see you, and Parvati from Poland, and Victor from The Hague. We have people from all over the place. And
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joyce, and thanks for inviting me. It's been a great occasion.
It's great to have you here.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming. This was a wonderful and very enlightening event. Thank you to our speakers once again.
Well, thank you all for coming so much.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Be well. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.